What if Nico Iamaleava is not Tennessee's best player in 2024? There's no debating, Caleb, that he is Tennessee's most important player. Quarterback position would lend itself to that. However, there's a guy that the NFL scouts seem to think, and Pro Football Focus and James Pearce, that could be a special type of talent. That's why they projected him number one. I could make a strong argument that if Nico's the second or third best player, but still good, which I think is the floor for Nico. I think it's good or perhaps very good. I don't think he's going to be an all-out bust no matter what. I could make a really strong argument that Tennessee would be better off if Nico Iamaleava wasn't the best player on the team. And portions of the program brought to you by our good friend Rick Terry. Rick Terry Jewelry Design. Rick Terry Jewelry Design is absolutely your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com. RickTerryJewelry.com. What are your thoughts on Nico perhaps not being the very best, highest graded player on the team? Is that good or bad for Tennessee?
Well, initially, I thought in my mind you're crazy for suggesting this because Josh Heupel's offense, Josh Heupel's whole system, everything to make Tennessee go is dependent on the quarterback putting up gaudy stats. So if the quarterback is not putting up gaudy stats, the season is probably usually disappointment. However, then I kind of thought further in my mind, and I thought, elite offensive attacks and edge rushers complement each other. Quarterbacks and edge rushers complement each other way more than you realize, because what happens? The quarterback gets the big lead. The other team is going to have to throw to come back, and you can unleash your edge rusher to wreak havoc. This was the Peyton Manning philosophy with the Colts, which is why Dwight Freeney turned into a Hall of Fame defensive end, because the Colts knew that Peyton Manning would get them a lead, and they could unleash Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis and when teams were having to throw to come back in the NFL. So then I started to think, well, if Nico's doing his job and he's doing what Josh Heupel wants him to do, well, then at that point, the other team will be forced to throw all the time, at which point Tim Banks and Rodney Garner can just unleash James Pearce, and he would have field day after field day, week after week. So because of that, it got a lot closer. But Dave, all I'm doing right now is steel manning your argument, because no, it's still Nico Iamaleava. It starts and ends with Nico Iamaleava because he's got to get that big lead for Tennessee to be able to run what it wants to run. So I still say, as much as James Pearce could actually end up being the bigger star relative to the two at the end of the year, relative to his position, put it that way, I still think Nico Iamaleava is the most important player.
I think at the end of the year, if you look at James Pearce as a star, if he is still at the same level that he is among analysts, that it's actually better if he's a proven commodity, if he's an all SEC player at the end of the year. Go ahead and click like and subscribe. We'll throw out the poll question as well that has to do with this. But I think we forget that James Pearce just openly defied the police officers. I think there is concern on campus that he may have another issue. So if he gets through the season and doesn't have an issue, then you've got a really good defensive end. I don't have those concerns about Nico. So let's say James Pearce graded out through the season a couple of points higher than Nico. I think they're a better football team, obviously, than if James Pearce gets in trouble between now and then.
Yeah. Yes, if he grades out higher, because James Pearce could end up being the best player at his position, and Nico may be in a clutter of maybe two or three quarterbacks, possibly, Carson Beck, somebody like that. But let
me ask it this way: does Nico have to be the best player for this to be a championship team?
He has to be the most important.
Well, he is the most important. I don't think there's any denying that today in May. But does he have to be elite on this team for the Vols to be a championship season?
Yes, he has to be elite. He absolutely has to be elite. There's no question about that. Everything about this team depends on what the quarterback is able to do. And so Nico absolutely has to be elite. I think that
I don't think so.
Oh, sorry. If he is good, Tennessee's not winning a championship. He has to be great.
I disagree. I'm going to paint a scenario. Now, maybe this is fairy tale land, okay? But I'm going to paint a scenario in which I think Tennessee is at a championship level, and Nico's very good. I get very good. I don't get great. I don't get elite. Okay, so we're talking around about the fifth, sixth best quarterback in the nation. So that's the parameters that we're dealing with. No injuries on the offensive line. James Pearce stays out of trouble, is an elite edge rusher, as I believe he is. The secondary falls into place. The big one is no injuries on the offensive line. But you give me those three things, and Nico's very good, not elite. I think Tennessee can play for a championship this year. Dylan says, as good as James Pearce is, we have plenty of talented depth behind him. We only got one Nico. It's a fantastic point, Caleb. I can't take that from Dylan or you.
If the offense is running and the system is running the way Josh Heupel wants it to run, it's not possible for the quarterback to not be elite. That is where I'm at with this. It's not possible.
That's interesting. Kind of like the young man Tommy Frazier. If he's not in some shape, form, or fashion making the right call and pitching it to the right guy or running up 180 yards on the ground on his own, then you're not having a good day at the office, is basically what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Everything about this is built around the quarterback being elite. So if the quarterback's not, it's like building your team around an elite scorer like Dalton Connect, and that elite scorer in basketball only averages 12 points a game. If he's only averaging 12 points a game and he's your scorer, like you build your team around a scorer, you're not winning. I mean, that's just how that happens. So this team is, Josh Heupel builds his entire system around his quarterback. Now, he makes things easier on his quarterback, which is why quarterbacks put up elite numbers in his system. But it's also why if they don't put up elite numbers, you have an issue. It was an issue that Joe Milton didn't put up elite numbers last year. If you just looked at the numbers, Dave, look at Joe Milton's stat line. It's one of the better seasons in Tennessee football history. I mean, it may be one of the top 10 quarterback seasons in Tennessee football history, just stats-wise. But we watched him play, and we're not going to consider that one of the best 10 quarterback seasons in Tennessee football history based on what we saw on the field. So that's how much Josh Heupel's offense props up quarterbacks. You're right. Tommy Frazier's a great one. Again, I brought it up yesterday. Steve Spurrier at Florida is a great one. If your quarterback isn't averaging 3 touchdowns a game in the fun and gun in the 90s, Steve Spurrier wasn't winning, right?
No, absolutely not. And I get your point, but I think you're discounting the one thing I said. If Tennessee's offensive line is healthy throughout the entire season, Tennessee could have one of the best running games in the SEC. If they're healthy on the offensive line, I think they're paper thin deep.
If they have one of the best running games in the SEC, they will have the most efficient quarterback in the SEC. That's what Josh Heupel wants to have. And therefore, again, Nico has to be elite. They had a good running game last year in the SEC. How'd that work out for them?
Fair.
I mean, it's so Nico has to be elite. Now, I'm going to throw this at you.
I'm ready.
If he plays, James Pearce has to be elite too. It's crucial that James Pearce is elite, because if James Pearce is not elite, that means he didn't have a lot of opportunities to rush the passer in obvious passing situations, because that's the goal of this team. The entire goal, and you can look at how Josh Heupel's recruited, he has focused more heavily on the defensive line and edge rushers than he has the secondary. Why is that? His philosophy is in obvious passing downs, he can drop a bunch of guys back in coverage. They don't have to be that good. He just needs bodies back there, and he can unleash edge rushers to wreak havoc. The reason you need an elite secondary in other situations is because you need guys that you don't want to have to drop a bunch of guys back. He wants to be able to do that with Tennessee.
Elias says great on the curve with this offensive scheme. You're right. When we see 330 yards in this offensive scheme, as opposed to like let's say Iowa's offensive scheme, it means more for Iowa to throw up 330 passing yards than Tennessee. But you can still grade players and give an actual grade of a quarterback beyond the stats. You and I both know that James Pearce could be havoc and only have a couple of tackles for a loss and no sacks. Nico could be fantastic and hit a lot of and I think this is actually going to happen in the second half of the season, hit a lot of plays underneath because teams are going to try to take away the downfield threat. Now you get into the running game. I think by midseason, Caleb, I think teams will adjust to take away the deep ball, and the running game might actually take over for Tennessee roundabout midseason. I say that because I believe that Nico is that good. Portions of the program brought to you by our good friends at Boundless Moving. From the 2-hour minimum to turnkey operations, they have you covered, absolutely covered. Boundless Moving moved me. They can move you, East Tennessee or Charlotte. So what do you make of that claim that Tennessee can have a good Nico, that Tennessee can be a, air quotes, running football team? You said it didn't get you where you wanted to go last year, so I don't think you're going to be a big fan of it.
This running football team that you're talking about, that's going to last for a game or two. They're still going to be a running team. Look, if the offense is doing well, they're still an elite running team. They're elite running and passing. You're talking about an offense that they want to average 600 yards if they can. Okay, so you could be elite at both. It's also going to be, though, where they really sell out to take away the pass. They're going to rely heavily on the intermediate passing game from Nico. And we saw this in the Citrus Bowl. Nico's very patient and very willing to use that intermediate passing game. I think more patient on that than Hendon Hooker is. Honestly, I think Hendon Hooker struggled in that aspect of his game.
Fair.
The intermediate passing game.
Need to see more.